You're listening to Construction Cashflow, examining the human side of construction cashflow and business culture.
My deepest impact is helping people build community or be a citizen of a community. How do you keep to your core values and your beliefs, but at the same time manage to innovate into a world where your skills are still desired? That's why I'm really keen to have this interview now, because there are so many people that are potentially going into fear in the middle of it, coming out of it, and if I can pass any thoughts on how we recovered.
In this episode, it's a real pleasure to introduce you to Penny Power OBE. Penny founded the Ecademy long before Facebook and LinkedIn were ever thought of. Penny is a renowned speaker, an expert on business and business community. Penny is also the author of Business is Personal and more recently the BIP 100 Club. It's a community for business experts. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Penny Power OBE. Hi Penny.
Hello Stu, lovely to see you.
And you, yeah, thanks so much for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you on today, and I'm sure the listeners will really want to know your story, where you got to where you are now, and the ups and downs, the hardships, the triumphs, and that you've been through. And I know you've written a book, and you were the first you developed the Ecademy, and lots of successes. But let's hear it from you. What's your story? How you got to where you are now, and what you see for the future?
Wow. So anybody that's listening to this, I'll put your mind at rest that I won't just rattle on, because that's I'm sure we'll have a good conversation about this. I'm really thrilled to be on this podcast, getting to know you, Stu, and seeing how open you are and how realistic you are about life. And the intention of this podcast is just absolutely fantastic. So I really am thrilled to be here. I get asked to be on quite a number of podcasts. It's very lovely when the podcast resonates with what my values are. And I'm, as people will find out, I'm very open. And so a little bit about me. So I'm 58. I am nearly 59, actually. I'm actually a leap year baby, born on the 29th of February, 64, and 3 children, 3 adult children, all got their own businesses now, and happily married for 32 years. And joined the IT sector when I was 19 in 83, and really didn't expect to be in business, but I was just filling in a gap year before going to university to do psychology. And I stayed because the tech industry in 83, anybody who's around our age will remember it was a real boom time when everything was going from mainframe and terminals onto the desktop, and the explosion of software. And then in 1998, so was I then nearly 34, I came up with this idea of, wouldn't it be amazing if the internet served us in more ways than just e-commerce and e-procurement? And at the time, this was before even Friends Reunited, which some people will remember, and 4 years before LinkedIn, 6 years before Facebook. Coming from a place of where family values are really important to me, and the ability for people to connect deeply and make one another feel significant in life, I felt that the internet was going to really, although it would connect us, it would possibly emotionally disconnect us. And I was right. Not wanting to be smug about that, I didn't realise how right I was being. But I really thought, wouldn't it be lovely if we could create a community, not a network, a community of business owners across the world, to help them become really strong friends with one another. And my husband, who is the ultimate connector, Thomas Power, loved the idea. He rocketed it. I was at home with 3 children under 4.5 at the time. So I was able to do a huge amount of the ambassadorial stuff, building the community and serving the community. Well, Thomas went around the world really growing it. And we grew it over 14 years into a phenomenal place, absolutely beautiful, where we had 5,000 offline events a year, but the culture was definitely warm and loving. And on the 7th of February every year, there's often a post by different members remembering the launch of Ecademy on that date, and really saying that that really set them on a course to understanding the real promise of the internet and what it could be. Where I am now, when I explained that in 2012, after 14 years, it came to an end, came to a really, really painful end for Thomas and I. At one point, the business was valued at 60 million. Was hardly trading at any great level, but it was valued, and we were just about to go on the stock market when the crash happened in 2000. And we kept growing the business organically without a major investment. But LinkedIn and Facebook became a huge challenge to us, not just because of the huge squillions of money that they had invested that enabled them to keep their code really squeaky and exciting and innovative. It was just very hard because everything became free at that point. We didn't believe in free. We believed in people properly authenticating who they are through their credit card. So we only charged $10 or £10 or €10. We didn't have advertising on the site. But the world really was starting to go across to broadcast, social media, and it was starting to disconnect. And the effort of being a friend to somebody else started to become irrelevant to a lot of people. And it just became untenable for us to keep the culture and the belief systems that we had going to a point where we could maintain the business in the way that we believed in. So we went from that huge valuation to being actually really quite financially destitute and, moving out of our home. We did volunteer to move out of the home, but into rental, make sure that we liquidise some of the money from the house so that we can maintain some of the standards that we wanted in our home life for our kids and the education that they were in. And since 2012, so what's that, just over 10 years, we've been rebuilding our lives. And that's why I'm really keen to have this interview now, because there are so many people that are potentially going into fear in the middle of it, coming out of it. And if I can pass any thoughts on how we recovered and how I can absolutely say I'm happier today than I was at any point during when Ecademy was big, because now we've created a business that's much more suits our personality and the intimacy that we want with people rather than a machine.
Do you think that's a key, Penny, to follow your path and to be brave enough to follow it? It's quite easy to, I suppose, if you've been part of a large organization like Ecademy and then you change course and you've done it on value and principles, the fear is it's easy to go back to where you were or to stay where you are.
I can't say that we were courageous at the time because it was a forced situation. If we could have avoided it, I think we'd have done anything we could, because you sort of feel like that is the only way of having oxygen and you cling on for dear life to the point where you realize you should have surrendered much earlier. But as anybody will know, actually seeing the writing, I should say, on the wall and actually believing it are two different things. So it would take courage. It would take a lot of courage to bring a business to a close before it became a disaster. That would be courageous. So I don't think we were particularly courageous. It became, there was an absolute full stop for us in the end. That was actually in chapter 2 of my book. I call it Being Broken, and it's the whole journey. It's almost like a historical look at the internet as well, because it's quite interesting to see what the difference between 1998 and 2012 in internet terms and in social networking, social media terms is really profound. I mean, in 98, we were teaching people what a blog was, and we were teaching people how to set up a profile. And you know, now it's second nature us all to know that whenever we join any network, we know to create a profile. And, you know, these things weren't second nature then. In 2012, when it came to an end, I think the greatest challenge for us was, well, what is our identity now? Because our identity was so connected to this global business called Ecademy. Yet we couldn't lick our wounds. We had to survive financially with 3 kids, various stages of their lives that required us to be strong and keep a roof over their head and keep them in their education and universities or whatever stage they were at. We very much had that scarcity mindset, not an abundant one. We were, you know, grabbing hold of whatever we could. I was very fortunate that I had actually come up with an idea, having written the Digital Business Britain manifesto with the business minister at the time was the overall minister was Vince Cable, but the business minister was Mark Prisk, and I wrote the Digital Business Britain manifesto. And in it was really talking about the skills gap. And it was really apparent that there was a digital skills gap, but you had these born digital youths coming through who all had social context around how to use YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, but they didn't have any commercial awareness. So there was this big gap. And in 2012 was when, you know, there was the Tottenham riots. There was a lot of very unhappy kids. And I looked at the apprenticeship model and thought, well, this is fantastic because it's vocational. Kids can come out of education in the traditional sense and start applying themselves to what their skill is rather than the way that they've necessarily been educated. And so we gave birth to a digital apprenticeship, a digital marketing apprenticeship, which didn't exist. And we trailblazed that, and I got investors and started a company called Digital Youth Academy. But it meant learning a whole new industry, learning education and learning how it's funded and learning further education colleges. But I was really beautifully welcomed into it by some people. And I think what I learned from that was that no matter what happens in your life, if you've maintained your own reputation and your brand and you have created goodwill, your social capital, as opposed to your financial capital, will help you. And it will help you through some of the toughest times. And that's what I really experienced when I moved into this education sector. There's some beautiful people in it running, particularly in further education, because they're sort of squeezed between traditional schools and higher education, the universities. They're sort of seen as the poor relation, yet they are such an important bridge, and they're run by amazing people. So I spent 4 years building that brand and that business until I got that through to an exit. But again, it wasn't an exit that was particularly financially successful. But it got me on the way. But I suppose the message in there is, how do you keep to your core values and your beliefs, but at the same time manage to innovate into a world where your skills are still desired? And it has been a very interesting 10, 11-year journey, actually, in that.
It's interesting what you say about the social capital and the identification, you know, because many of us, and even myself included, we identify ourselves with our job or our business. What do you do? I'm a professional this or a professional that. And one thing I'm discovering is that, like you say, if you can build, do we build, how do we identify with who we are rather than, you know, identifying with our job or our profession? And particularly coming up to retirement age, you know, we may not be doing the same profession anymore. Maybe we have retired from that profession. You know, then we ask the question, well, who are we now? You know, do you have any suggestions to people that maybe approaching that age, that, you know, how they can start to really search for that truth around who they are rather than identify with what they've done all their life? I mean, I found myself thinking, you know, what am I identifying? What's my, you know, has my programming for most of my professional career, you know, my identification of myself actually been not true to who I really am, you know, and I think one of the most difficult things for me is to come to a realization, admit that, my God, I could have been wrong for all of those years, you know.
Yeah,
And
well,
now
we
look,
have different
now I'm finding
drivers,
my
though.
legs. Yeah, I'm
I
finding my
know.
voice, you know.
But that is just an absolute gift in life when you, whether it's forced on you or you take this moment to have a bit of a gap where you jump off the conveyor belt, whatever you've been on. And for me, that was actually in 2018, because I identified myself not only by Ecademy, but I identified myself as being a successful entrepreneur. I'm a bit of a purist about the term entrepreneur, because to me, an entrepreneur is very different to a small business owner. Okay. And I know a lot of small business owners will call themselves an entrepreneur. That's completely a personal decision. So, but for me personally, identify myself as an entrepreneur, which I was within Ecademy and Digital Youth Academy, very different to actually how I wanted to live my life. So those two businesses were about building scalable businesses for exit, were about innovating completely new ideas, were about really trailblazing and evangelizing a subject and being a voice for that subject. Both of them, I came from ground zero. So with Ecademy, nobody knew what social networking was in 1998. And with Digital Youth Academy, no businesses realized they could hire a digital apprentice. They knew they could hire an apprentice in digital, in computing or in marketing, but they didn't realize there was somebody had created a bridge. Those are really entrepreneurial decisions. The other decision part about being an entrepreneur is that you are deferring the gain. So it's all risk when you're an entrepreneur building a business that's scaling. And I think that was a place that I got to in 2018 where I realized I am risk adverse. I have always been risk adverse. I don't want to be that person anymore. And I haven't got enough time left in my life, I felt, to be that person, to recover from another failure or another whatever, whatever you would call it. And so in 2018, I sort of stepped away from that and moved into how do I just make an income as opposed to how do I make an asset. And that was a really interesting shift for me. And that's when I was very proud to be a small business owner and not necessarily do anything that's reinventing anything or inventing anything new. I just thought, what are my qualities and what is my experience that I can bring to people that I want to do work with? And that filter was really important to me. Who do I want to surround myself with that makes me feel significant? It's very easy in this world to feel very insignificant, to feel small. And a lot of people join the social media world and they get into the whole comparison and they start building business models and they start broadcasting themselves and getting themselves into a very stressful mindset because they're trying to build something that's beyond their own desires, really, and particularly possibly their capabilities. But they just think that big is beautiful. And I've experienced big and it wasn't beautiful. Not for me. It was for our members. And I'm very proud of what we achieved. But for Thomas and I, there was never a day when we had the income we needed building this huge business. So when I became more income focused and thought about, well, what do we truly need? And that also was about really reevaluating what your own personal financial ambitions are. How many of us have the amazing car, the amazing house, more because of an identity than the actual needs that we have? And those were the things that, we had. And did it bring us huge happiness, really, to have those things? And so in 2018, I stepped into a very different mindset around my life and what was needed to make me a happy person. And the strapline to my book that I wrote that year was Be the Leader of Your Life and Business. And it actually started with me going to see a psychologist because not only we had a lot of financial trauma, we also had some family traumas that were really significant. Premature deaths of my brother, my niece. My mum had dementia. My daughter went through a terrible trauma where she was abducted by 3 men. And there was so much trauma going on in our life, as well as financial trauma, by 2018, I didn't have a burnout experience, not an obvious one, but I definitely knew I wasn't as happy as I could be. And so that opportunity to reevaluate my life and talk it through with a psychologist is what I've actually included in my book, because I felt like there should be 5 million people in the room with me who were all struggling business owners, to really give us an idea of what are our character traits and our personality traits that we're not really aligning with in the way that we're trying to live our lives. And so since 2018, my husband and I have reconstructed our lives. And actually, interestingly, our income is higher than it's ever been, but we just don't have an asset like we had. But what was that asset giving us, really? It was a dream.
Yeah, I think with myself as well, you know, I did scale my business at one point, and you know, had the income, and I was identifying with the status. I'm not sure I was particularly happy. I was continually striving. And it wasn't till I was able to let it go, had to let it go.
Yeah.
The unraveling of who I thought I was to get into me wasn't a straightforward, easy process.
No.
But it's getting me to a place where I'm reevaluating what I want out of life, and going back to what you said about, you know, it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. You know, it can be, you know, just focused in on where you think your strengths and weaknesses are, you know, what you prefer to feel more comfortable with, where the vibe is that gives you a little boost, you know. And so I think staying on that, I think it's you know, really amazing and noble of how you've actually transformed from a large, you know, the large organization, going through the difficult times that you did with the traumas, and then coming to where you are now, because you seem so happy and bright and vibrant and a lot of and positive energy. So how did you how did that transition from that, where you were at that low point, how was that transition to where you are now, that healing process? I mean, what kind of things did you do, or was it just a kind of did it kind of evolve?
No, I think there was a lot of effort put into it, but with a lot more clarity about what was right for me. So in 2018, I just stepped away from that aspirational entrepreneur mindset into, actually, I am really comfortable with who I am, just who I am. And that's a really interesting subject in its own right. And there was a few things that catalyzed that for me. One of them was, I mean, I've been really blessed that I've always been asked to do a lot of public speaking, which is fantastic. And I love my public speaking career. And that didn't come to an end. But actually, I had got used to entering any room and people knew who I was, right? And so this will make me sound like I'm a real egotist, but it was incredible for the ego. It gave me confidence. If you walk into a room and people know who you are, you're going to have a lot more confidence. And there was an event early on in 2018 in Bristol, and I was asked to speak at it, but the amount of money they were willing to pay me was a lot less than I'm used to, or I used to command. But I thought, yeah, I'll do it. I want to do it. It was to small businesses. It was sort of a small business expo. And when I drove down it was an awful journey. I live in Farnham in Surrey. I had a terrible journey down the M4 to Bristol. Terrible time going, what's that, M something, that when you come off the M4 down to Bristol. And really panicked, pouring with rain. Couldn't find a car park. Finally found a car park. Lugged my stuff across the car park, soaking wet, into this expo room. Now, what I was always used to was there would usually be a green room. Somebody would meet me. They would say, "Oh, Penny." I think there's a thing where it's very good for speakers to be boosted a bit, because you're going to have a lot of courage to stand and speak. So usually I was used to people saying, "Fantastic, you're here, Penny," you know, given a cup of coffee. Instead, I found myself queuing with everybody to get a badge, nobody knowing who I was, and then taken by somebody in a very unprofessional way to a room that I was going to speak in. And found that in this room there were hardly anybody in there, and I was used to big audiences. There was about 12 people in the room, and when I asked just to get some context, does anybody know me? Not one person knew me. And the whole experience was really grounding for me, but it absolutely played to the dark side of me that I hadn't realized I had, which was, but surely you know who I am, right? So I actually sent a little bit of a task, and I went off to the loo and I Googled how to get out of the way of your own ego while I was sitting on the loo, just to give myself some, because I was literally in a bit of a frenetic feeling. And I realized what was going on, and I reset my head. This isn't about you, Penny. It's what impact you can have on those 12 people. And that's always been my mantra in life. But for some reason, this transition was really testing that. And we had a really successful, lovely, intimate time, talking with them, helping them. It was almost like group coaching that I did in the end. And on the way home, I rang Thomas from the car and I said, oh my God, Thomas, I just had the most awful experience. Nobody knew who I was. And Thomas said, isn't that fantastic? And that Thomas to be on the big stage and known by everyone for much longer than me and much deeper than me across the world. And I sort of was a bit pissed off with him when he said it. And I said, oh, you don't understand. Put the phone down. Drove home thinking about it. And actually, within about 48 hours, I thought he was so right. Because the strain of trying to keep up an identity absolutely strips you of what you really are and who you want to be and who you can be for the world and the people that are in front of you. And I think this whole subject of ego is really interesting. Somebody who you should interview is a brilliant lady called Mary Gregory, who wrote a book called Ego. She's
amazing.
She's been one of my clients. She joined our mastermind. She's a fantastic lady. She was a member of Ecademy. And I've actually hired her to do some webinars for our clients. It's a really interesting subject because we need ego. You know, I read in a book that, you know, you come down, I think it was in a Power of Now or something, but you come down, you're born in spirit. You come from spirit into a human existence. You die in spirit. And then that line across that sort of line that you're going through, you don't want to stay too spiritual and you don't want to go into too much ego. You actually want to find the balanced position in the middle to have a human experience, because we all know people who are too ego aren't very easy to communicate with, and people who are too spiritual can also be hard to communicate with. If you can find that balance, and that's been a real place for me in my life where, and I think balancing ego and our decisions are we making decisions based on our ego, or are we making our decisions based on impact? And I think that was a very catalytic time for me to think, actually, it's always been about impact. When I started Ecademy, I never knew what it was going to become. It was always about loving and caring for business owners and creating a loving, caring culture. And so how do I create that again? And so we did. Thomas and I started Businesses Personal 100, Bit 100, for experts. And there's only 100 people in it. That means we can create the intimacy. We don't have any fake people in it. We can create that true sense of significance and connection that we want to do. So I think we have to really look inside ourselves before we can start to externalize ourselves. I think that's really important. And that's the journey I went on.
Amazing. It's an amazing journey. And, you know, most people that have become successful that I read of, they talk about ego. And you're exactly right. It's the ego that wants to keep us safe. The ego that kind of wants us to have that edge. But then you're right, to balance that with understanding. And I think sometimes the ego really doesn't want us to know who we really are.
Yeah.
You know, it wants us to be who we think other people think we should be.
Exactly. You know? You're living up to something that's, not really required for your own happiness. So
yeah.
And I think once you know that and you start to rebuild from that, because it's fascinating talking to you, because you're now, you know, this knowledge, you've niched yourself really into understanding procurement and cash flow and how that can affect profitability and the on-timeness of a project. That's clearly something you enjoyed about it, but you've had this big quantity surveyor, you know, quite a big reaching brand in that. But now, I think now is the time for us all to really niche into what really gives us joy and where our deepest impact can be. And it will be just my deepest impact is helping people build community or be a citizen of a community and know how to be a citizen. That to me is that's aligns with me when I was a 10-year-old all the way through to when I'm a 110-year-old, hopefully.
Yeah. It's a fantastic subject, community, and I think it's really coming back. People are searching, particularly with what we've been through the last 3 years. People are really searching to find their identity and find their identity in a community. I know with me, when I found myself homeless, somebody suggested to me join a choir, and something I hadn't done that before, and I'd never would have dawned on me to join a choir. And it's a choir called the Choir with No Name. And it's a choir that's been set up. It's actually a charity, but it's set up for homeless and marginalised people. And I went along there and I was feeling, I suppose, pretty deflated, pretty down, And I went there and I got such a boost. And there's people there from all sorts of, and it's community. I didn't realise at first, but it's actually community. We go there, we sing together, and then we have a meal together afterwards. And there's people from all sorts of walks of life that have maybe hit on hard times, men and women that have maybe been homeless, lived on the streets. Some of the testimonies are amazing, from people that have been millionaires and now are not, people that maybe have suffered some mental health problems or other health problems, people that have been shot, stabbed, you name it. Some of them, they say it's it's a life-saving event to be part of a community, and I think it is. If you find your own identity and find that within a kind and loving community, maybe people that share in similar walk of life as you, whether it's business or personal, or you've got some maybe you're suffering homelessness, but you can share it together, and I think that carries the burden, gives you a bit of a boost.
It's lovely, and I think what we all want to know is that our human experience is actually normal. I think it's very hard if we don't become part of a community and have real experiences and real conversations. We will feel very isolated and think that we're so abnormal, that we've screwed up somewhere in our lives. We will, it's so important to be in a community where you are with normal people who talk normal life and realize that the human experience is a real challenge. It can be very beautiful, but I look out, we've got a meadow next to us here and it's flooded at the moment, and I look out every day. Sometimes there are deer, sometimes there are fox, sometimes there are birds, and I look at them and I think, we are just animals. At the end of the day, I'm watching them, hoping they don't get smashed by a car on the road, hoping they get enough food in, hoping they find shelter tonight. We're all the same. We are all the same. And so our 90 years, or however long we have on this earth, every single person will have moments when they can't find the food, when they can't find the shelter, when they're dodging the car that's going to run them over. It's just the human experience is still an animal experience, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But when we are listening to other people and take time to listen, which is a beautiful thing to do for others, it's so calming, because we then realize that it's not that we are screwing up on life, that we're just all doing our best and things happen to us. Sometimes they're in our control and sometimes they're not. And at the moment, the world is in turmoil. We've come out of COVID, we've got wars, we've got cost of living crisis. Nobody should be embarrassed at all by the situation they find themselves in, but they do need to have the courage, as you've said earlier, to connect in with communities, whether it's a singing one. I in 2018 walked into our local church for the first time, and I walked in, I did a post on LinkedIn about this, and it's actually unbelievable how much attention this post has got. because I explained that I just walked into the church not knowing whether I believed in God, but I only wanted to find love and hope. And I said to the vicar after the first service that I did, sitting in there, and I was very emotional at the back of the church, I was crying quite a lot. And he came up to me and he said, "What brings you here?" And I said, "I have no idea whether I believe in God, but I just felt I needed a sense of love and hope around me." And he said, "Well, I believe God brought you here. So that's up to me to believe that, but you can definitely have as much love and hope as you want." And Thomas and I love it there. I'm still on a journey to whether I believe in, I watched this incredible congregation. But that was my version of you going to the singing community. And my desire is to bring true community to the business world. So I suppose we've been through watching social networking, then social media, and now the next true phase should be community. A lot of people are relabeling their networks into community and saying we run a community, but a community doesn't function at a transactional level. It functions for the citizens, by the citizens, and enables citizens to love one another and give each other significance. And that's really what we did back in '98 and what we believed in until we had to close it in 2012. And that's what we're bringing back ourselves, but also helping others to achieve it within their businesses.
So what would you say the difference between a network and a community is, and how, for example, would you say Facebook or LinkedIn is a network or a community?
Well, first of all, I would say that if people are in a community, they'll use the phrase, "I belong to a community. I belong to it." When they talk about a network, they tend to say, "I use a network." So that immediately says, one is an emotional word. A sense of belonging is a human need. Anybody that knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the 5 it's the middle one. After satisfying your physical needs, feeling safety, the next one is a sense of belonging and attachment. Then you get self-esteem, and then you get self-actualization. So first of all, you'll only feel you're in a community if you really have a deep sense of belonging as a citizen of it, where you feel you've got a voice and where you feel people listen to you, and where it's not just purely transactional. Networks are great, absolutely fine, but networks tend to be more transactional. People go business networking in order to look for business, and fantastic, that's fine. And sometimes that's all that is available to us. That's really all that has been available to us, is business networking. However, some people, so there's the BNI network, the Business Network International Network, created over 30 years ago. And they run breakfast networks. And now I know, because I've been aligned to them for years, I've done lots of speaking and supporting global conferences and things like that. Some of the BNI leaders will treat it like a community, because the leadership is there to serve. And you have to have a servant leadership approach to running a community. It's not about you, it's about the citizens and what they're achieving and getting. And definition of achieving can be very wide. It can be a sense, reducing your sense of loneliness, even in a business network. I mean, I do a survey regularly on it, and over 70% of business people say that they are lonely in this survey. And I get a good number of people answering it. Loneliness, it's in our lives in many ways, but business loneliness is really huge. And it's not surprising, especially now we've got remote working as well. Because when you're in a community, you get a sense of connection, proper connection. You get a sense of contribution where you can contribute to others and others will contribute to you. And you get a sense of significance. And significance is the feeling of being worthy of attention. That's what significance means. When you're in a network, it's very different. It's more about what you do, not who you are. And people will filter based on, is this person going to be useful to me, either as a client or a supplier? They're not really spending the time to deeply open up at a really truthful level with one another and become potentially lifelong friends.
I think you're right. And particularly in certain circles, particularly in my professional background, sometimes it's a little bit taboo to to let your emotions or feelings, it's all very professional, and you have to remain professional. And sometimes I think a little bit of authenticity and a little bit of openness, even in business, as you say, we're all human, we're all animals, if you like, we're human beings, we've got emotions, we've got energy. And even in a business meeting, we're all trying to hide the vibe, we're all trying to be very professional, but maybe there'd be a better connectiveness, maybe better outcomes if people were able to be a little bit more open. I know when in my position, I found it very kind of part of my healing process to share. And I'm not quite sure whether people really want to hear it. That's the fear. If I open up and say, well, I'm in this position, I've got here because, I might be frightened that people might think, well, he's less than because he's ended up doing that. But I found that sharing it, I did a series of live Facebook lives talking about where I was and what I was doing. And probably because I was reasonably confident nobody was looking, but I started to find out people were looking. But I found it very cathartic, really. It was part of my healing but also I think keeping myself accountable to myself, that I'm going to actually, turn the corner and turn this into something positive, trying to not label the feeling, this is a bad thing. Just try and feel the energy. And what is this? What is it? Just observing it and saying, well, actually, I can push this into something. This is actually just energy that I can push into something more positive. And
that's brilliant.
Yeah,
that is brilliant. It is. I think, that when you get the opportunity to share, and we can do that in many ways, you are getting to a point of acceptance about where you are. And the opposite of acceptance is resistance. And until you can accept, and so clearly you went through a journey and I went through the journey of just accepting, not, just accepting it's happened. And actually, scientifically, my psychologist told me that really does create quite a big shift in the neural pathways of your brain. It actually moves you from being defined by your past into becoming a memory, but not defining you. And I did this with 16 different things that were defining my everyday, things that would come up in my everyday that were not relevant to my future. And so I went through what's called EMDR, and I went through that. Sharing with a psychologist was the first step of what you talk about, and then you shift into acceptance, and then when you go past acceptance, you're ready to move forward. But until you are able to talk about it, even if it's just with one psychologist or one friend, until you're ready to own up to it and talk it through, you are resisting. And while you're still in resistance, you're in denial. You can't move forward. You just can't move forward until, and you're also asking people to accept me for who I am, not for what I am. And I think we want to do business with people when we know who they are. And so you haven't lost your skills, your talent at all. What you've enhanced is who you are, massively around that. So when people hire you now, they're getting a really authentic, empathetic experience. It's far more powerful than people putting on a suit and tie and pretending to be successful.
And then it's coming back to the community and the things that you've developed, particularly, the exciting project that the BIP 100 Club, which, people are in community, and it's that business community that they can share in confidence and be authentic. And I think it comes back to that, doesn't it? And going back to what you said, that, they can build long lasting, deep relationships. And that's around business, maybe not always. How does that? Where do you go from a community of professionals and business people? Where is that line between that kind of personal relationships and the transactional relationships?
Yeah,
you
it's
know, because
very
it's kind
true.
of finding where that is.
It is. I mean, we say community first, commerce second in terms of set values. And we spend a lot of time talking to people that apply before we actually say, I think you would enjoy this community. You're right for it, and we're right for you. Because we want to make sure that this investment is going to give them value. And if there's a mismatch, it's just going to be a waste of money. So effectively, the community is run either on, we run it on Slack, where that's an open community where people can talk and ask questions, and there's various themes on it. We run it on Zoom, where there's 3 or 4 Zooms every week with different themes where people come in and talk and share and help each other in different ways. But the most critical part of it is that we've got everybody's profile on an app, and it's the real culture of having one-to-ones, so that when you know and have the courage to say to someone, can I have a one-to-one with you? You know that you're going into a situation where it's going to be community first, commerce second. But ultimately, everybody will talk about their business, but people have got to know each other. And one of our members said they don't Google it now, they BIP it. And so when you create that, you create a very natural marketplace where people will look a bit like, no difference to the offline world, where I live in a village called Tilford. There's a pub, there's a cricket club, there's a village hall, there's a little primary school, and there's neighbours. And some people won't ever go to the pub. They'll literally knock on each other's doors as neighbours and have each other in for cups of tea or a glass of wine, and they're doing the one-to-ones. Some people will spend every Friday night in the pub, and they'll be known in there, and they'll be seen in that light. Some people will say, we've got a cricket field, but we haven't got a cricket club. Why don't we start one? And one of the citizens will create a new idea. And we've had that happen, where the diary has expanded on what's going on, because a member will say, I'd like to contribute this to it. Thursday night, we're going to the theatre with a load of members because a member has said, I'm going to arrange 4 theatre trips this year. That's true community. But the commercial part happens because everybody's interested in business. Everybody's intrigued by, I'm very interested in you as a person. And now I know that you belong to this singing group and what you've been through. But I'm also clocking and tagging the fact that you understand construction cash flow, for example. That tag sits with people, and they just always are looking out for opportunities for each other. Because it's great when you can pass that connection to someone. I mean, today I've connected loads of people to loads of people as a speaker. I've had a conversation with a speaking agency, and I've said, what other types of speakers do you look for? And I'm constantly thinking of that community, but they're all doing that. In the same way, in the pub, you'll get to know who the plumber is and the roofer is and the gardener is and the accountant is. Anybody says, oh, I've got a leak, you'll go, oh, you need to use Mike,
Yeah, and I suppose from an entrepreneurial perspective, we have certain traits that are, maybe skills that cross boundaries. That we pull them together and say, well, Mike's good at that, and Fred and Sharon's good at that. Why don't we? There's something we can pull together, and we can do this
and do some collaborative projects. Definitely,
yeah.
We're seeing that in many ways. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Well, it's really lovely speaking to you.
Oh.
Do you have time for a quick fire round?
A quick fire round? Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. We'll do a quick fire round. Quick questions around you and a bit of motivation. So the first one, how do you start your day?
So at the moment, I'm struggling with a very, very broken knee, but so I'm not doing as much as I would like to when I first get up in the morning, but I am still swimming. So I go to a local pool, an outdoor pool, 3 times a week and swim 2 kilometers front crawl.
When are you most productive?
When am I most productive? First thing in the morning. I love mornings. I used to do my revision for my A levels and things at sort of 5:30 in the morning. So I'm very, very alive in the mornings. Evenings, I get very tired. I like to be in bed by 9.
What's something new happening in your life right now?
Well, we got into so right now, from a business perspective, I'm writing my book called Community Mindset. So that's that. But we also we did decide to get a motorhome. And so that's really a new hobby for us. So that's lovely, going off in our motorhome.
My next question was going to be, what does adventure look like to you? But I think you may have just answered it.
Yeah. Freedom.
Freedom.
Just freedom of the road. Yeah.
What thing would you love to do that might surprise your friends and family?
What do I love to do? I do love jigsaws.
The cat's out the bag.
I love a jigsaw.
I think we've covered the name of change you overcome that changed your life. If there was one, what would it be?
What changed my life?
Yeah, a challenge, one challenge that really you overcome that changed your life.
Well, yeah, I think that was the loss of the business in 2012. Yeah.
What or who or what inspires you and motivates you?
Well, this will sound very sickly, but definitely my husband and our 3 adult children. I think the more we can do that reverse mentoring where young people. So I actually have, my daughter is my coach. I meet her twice a month. I pay her just like any other client would. She's helping me to move through from being an achiever to being a performer, in terms of mindset. Thomas, his relentless ability to connect people, his memory really inspires me. My son is one of them is a mental health guy, TJ Power on Instagram. He's amazing. He works in neuroscience and he really inspires me. He runs a weekly session on wellbeing for our members. And my other son is in the blockchain world, but he's really transforming it from a very really community-based stuff, which really is inspiring because he understands Web 3.0 very clearly.
And what does success mean to you?
Success means to me is just that inner peace, which not saying you can get it every day, but if I can just be content and grateful for what I have, that is success.
Amazing. And one last question. What advice would you give to your young self?
Don't get an investor.
Nice one. Yeah. Thank you for that, Penny. Well, it's been absolute amazing having you on. A wonderful conversation, really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I've loved every minute. Thank you.
You're listening to Construction Cashflow, examining the human side of construction cash flow and business culture.